Hi everybody, this is Gerard from Missio Scotland, and I am delighted to bring you the first of the We Are Mission podcasts, a podcast of Missio Scotland. And who better to have on the very first episode than Missio Scotland's National Director, Father Vincent Lockhart. Father Vincent, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, yeah, nice to be here.
So we'll just start off with, it's kind of an easy one, so just tell us a wee bit about your background for folk that don't know. Where was home, what was family life growing up, and so on?
Yeah, I'm from Lanarkshire, and more or less most of my youth was spent in Lanarkshire, apart from one period in Arbroath. First 2 years of my life were in Moss End, then we moved to Arbroath. Then we moved to Bellshill, and then we moved up to Arbroath. And yeah, I went to school there, primary school. And yeah, after a while, we came back down to the west of Scotland to Hamilton. My father was in the building trade, so he kind of yeah. And then I come from, my parents were great people. My father was a very wise guy, a very insightful person, very tremendous faith, but also a good man, had a great sense of social justice, and that's been a big thing in our family. My mother's father was an MP. He was a Labour Party MP who went into Parliament just after the war, the Second World War. So there was a great sense of that faith wasn't just about saying your prayers. It was about being involved, how you influence society, how you lived out your life in a community of other people. I went to secondary school in Holy Cross in Hamilton, and then I became an apprentice chartered accountant, and serving mammon and money. And then it was a very, very close family. There was 5 children. So I have an older brother, an older sister, a twin sister, and a little sister. So we were always very close, but it was also a family that was full of a lot of faith. Mm-hmm. Even when we lived in Arbroath, there used to be benediction on a Sunday night, and we were the choir. So we were the choir for benediction. Music was a big thing in our family. It was,
And then you mentioned there that you went into accountancy, but prior to that, if we go back to your school days a wee bit, what sort of subjects were you interested from a young age?
I was interested in art, actually. I liked to paint and to draw and all that. But I loved science, particularly physics. I was right into astronomy, and I have a great passion for quantum mechanics and stuff like that, and literature. Yeah, I mean, I fancied my Barra as a poet at one time. So I kind of, I've always, the kind of main thing, I always wanted to create something. That was the big thing. And at school, I don't think I worked as hard as I should have done. I think that was a lesson I learned later, to kind of work harder at studying.
And way back then, did you ever have an inkling that you might become a priest one day, or did you have a different path kind of in mind for yourself?
When I was a wee boy, I thought to become a priest, and then I kind of got involved in secondary school and music and misbehaving and stuff like that, and it was only, the way that my father was very influential in my life, and he set up a youth conference of the St. Vincent de Paul in our parish, Our Lady in St. Anne's in Hamilton. And that was the first time that had ever been done in Scotland. I don't know if anybody else, but because he said, young people need to get together with other young people to live their faith. And so he set up the Youth St. Vincent de Paul. So I was very involved in that, and kind of very involved in my parish, in the life of the parish. But that taught me a great deal about, putting my faith into action. And I remember as a young apprentice CA, I was told to go and show this sort of a tenement block in the West End of Glasgow to a Miss O'Neill and her friend who were interested in buying this whole apartment or this whole kind of tenement. And, we went around and she was asking the law about this and about that, changing different things. And we got to the top floor, and some months previously there had been quite a big storm. And so she said, I want to see the top floor, if there's any leakage in any of the houses up there. So we knocked on the door, and this old guy opened the door. He was probably about 50. And he said, oh, son, he said, you're the first person I've spoken to for 2 weeks. And he just wanted to speak to me.
Yeah.
And Miss O'Neill wanted to kind of know the legal stuff, and, and I felt myself being torn between the two. And I thought, no, I'll just talk to the old guy.
Yeah.
And that was a kind of, it maybe seems a small incident, but it was significant. In that moment, it was almost as if this is what I want to live for. I want to live to be for other people in a way that will comfort them and be with them and so on. So that I think was a significant experience.
So that's quite an unusual catalyst, because a lot of times people point to maybe a kind of religious figure in their life and stuff like that. It's just a wee fella that you met while doing the job and things like that. Were there any kind of priests or religious people that inspired you back then?
Yeah, we had a wee parish priest, wee Joe Martin was his name. And he was an Irishman. I'm not sure whereabouts came from in Ireland, but a very humble wee guy. Very quiet, probably quite shy. But there was something about him that kind of struck me as he had integrity. And then, there were priests that I knew who, one in particular, a guy called Tom Mulligan, who was a Mill Hill father, who, my mother used to play badminton with him when he was young, and he would appear every few years back, and so I would get to know him, and I never thought that one day I would be in the next parish to him in Cameroon, but often the people who kind of influenced me most, I think, in my life of faith would have been lay people.
Yeah.
Like my grandparents, they were very devout people, in the religious sense. But particularly people like my grandfather, who was a real character, the one who was an MP, he was engaged. You had to live your life with intelligence. And faith is not something confined to the four walls of a church, And then also, I when I was young, I was still at school, I became involved in a group called the Focolare movement, which is essentially a kind of lay movement within the Catholic Church, although, there are people who are Anglicans or people of other Christian denominations, and even people of other faiths are involved in the Focolare movement. And they had a spirituality that I think was probably the biggest influence on my faith life. You know, it was that you lived your life with others, you lived your faith with others. And yeah, I mean, I'll come on to that a bit later. Yeah.
Okay. So you have that encounter, the old fella, and something stirs inside you, and you decide to take up your vocation. So what was the kind of pathway to that?
Well, I went down to see wee Joe Martin, Father Martin, just because I was thinking about it, you know. And before I knew it, it seems as though I'd signed in the dotted line, you know. And I'd kind of thought of maybe a religious life, you know. At one point, I thought of entering the Carmelites because they seemed really cool. And yeah, and so what happened then was I then entered Cardross, St. Peter's Cardross. I did my philosophy there, and then I decided that I wanted to do a spiritual year, which was kind of unusual in those days. I think they thought that I wanted to leave. So, but anyway, I then went to Frascati, and I lived with about 100 other priests and seminarians from all over the world, from every nation, who were there. It was a kind of 6 months to a year's formation course in spirituality, and we lived intensely together, the kind of spirituality of the Focolare movement. And then after a year, I then went to Cardross, which had, not Cardross, Dry Grange, which was, you know, my Bishop Thompson at the time, shifted his seminarians from Cardross to Dry Grange. And so I did my theology there, and then I was ordained a deacon, which is what, you know, you normally become a deacon a year before you're ordained a priest. But I had kind of doubts about becoming a deacon, and I had doubts about what kind of priest I should be if God was calling me to that. And so about 2 months before my ordination, you know, I cancelled my ordination. And then, I mean, that was a particularly dark period of time, because I wasn't sure. The idea of kind of, I looked at the state of the church. I don't want to get into kind of too many details, but I kind of looked at the state of the church where there seemed to be a lot of division. And that kind of made me hesitate about committing my life to that kind of environment. And so eventually I spoke with a guy that I trusted, very wise guy, a priest. And so the idea was that I would come out and have a few years to think about it. So I then went and lived in the West End of Glasgow, which was great. And at a certain point, I thought to get married to someone. We used to meet at Mass every night. I worked in Easter House in Glasgow, setting up projects for young people in the kind of northeast of Glasgow, which was an area where there were a lot of unemployed young people. And then, so I thought, yeah, I'd quite like to get married. And I mean, I don't know if I'll go into all of this. You can maybe edit this whole story out, but it's quite long. And then, so I went to Rome to speak to this priest that I knew, a guy called Silvano Colla, who was an amazing person, an amazing priest, very real. And we sat down together, and I said, Silvano, I'm thinking about getting married. And he said, well, thanks be to God that you've finally made up your mind. I said, I know. I said, but I've already said yes to God by agreeing to become a deacon. So we spoke for a while, and then he said, we sat in silence for about 15 minutes, and he said, just listen to the Holy Spirit in your heart. And within me, I kind of saw these two roads. One was the kind of path to marriage and, 6 winds and, sort of rainbows and bluebirds flying and a sunny day stuff,
Yeah.
And then this other road, which was the road of priesthood, which was kind of dark and uncertain, full of isolation, perhaps, challenges. And then at a certain point, I thought, when you have to choose between two things that seem the will of God, you choose the one that costs you most. And I thought, marriage and so on and all that is lovely, and it isn't all a bed of roses and bluebirds, But I thought, priesthood, that's my cross.
Mm-hmm.
There's crosses in both, but I thought, that's my cross. And we choose the cross. We don't choose, the joys and all that stuff first, although they do come. And so that he said to me, he said, well, go down to Cameroon. He said, Folklore Movement has a parish there. They run a school, a college, a hospital, different things. Go there and go for a year and see what you think. And it was while I was there that I felt, yeah, that this is for me. So I went as a deacon, and I felt, yeah, and then I felt certainty, but also happiness at the idea of becoming a priest. So I then came back to Scotland, got ordained, and Bishop Devine, my bishop, agreed to leave me free to go with the Folklore Movement back to Cameroon.
Mm-hmm. So when was that?
So I went to Cameroon in 1982, and I got ordained September 1983.
Were you surprised at yourself that you decided to take what seemed to be the more difficult path in those two choices? Because a lot of people would go for the kind of seemingly easier choice.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, no doubt some psychologists could analyze me and come up with a weird answer, but I would say a vocation isn't just something that you suddenly decide, on the spot, in a moment. It's prepared by lots of little steps. And I think for me, ultimately, vocation meant about doing the will of God. So doing the will of God in small things helps you then to do the will of God when the big decisions come. So that I think, was a surprise at me. No, I don't think I was surprised that that's the way I did it. No, I mean, yeah, it was a bit of a tortuous journey. But anyway, that's me.
It's quite interesting though, because a lot of people you speak to that have became priests or became religious, they were very kind of definite about their vocation. It's quite refreshing to hear that you had doubts, because as Catholics we all have doubts about various different things, and sometimes maybe we're too proud to actually say that we do. So it's quite refreshing to hear that. In terms of, your vocation, was there a kind of saint or scripture passage you kind of came back to in the course of it?
In terms of, yeah, I've had the privilege actually of knowing people who were saints, who are saints, and I've had the privilege in my life of meeting some extraordinary people. And what strikes me is it's all about the humanity. A saint is a person who is fully human, warts and all. So there were a whole number of people, and some of them I would think will be canonized. One guy in Italy, Gina Giordani, who's an amazing person, and Chiara Lubick, and what counts, I think, they had humanity. And it's, a saint is where the fullness of humanity is revealed in such a way that it shows you God. In terms of passages of scripture, there's loads of passages of scripture that I'm very attached to, but I think of them all, I think the one, if I had to probably two, if I had to pick two passages, and one kind of ties up with the whole notion of what we've been saying about vocation. Both from the Gospel of John, Jesus said, "You did not choose me. You did not choose me. No, I chose you to go out and to bear fruit that will last." So it's not a case of me kind of, or I'm choosing. No, I hand my will to God, and because He chose me, and He chose me to do priesthood, which I'm really glad He did. The other phrase I think that kind of marks my heart and my soul would be, "May they all be one." And I think that informs everything that I try to do, to build unity, to build bridges, whether it's with other cultures or whether it's with other faiths or just other people who are in front of you, is you've got to build a bridge. You don't build walls. You don't
Absolutely,
create division.
And as someone who's experienced kind of struggles in terms of your faith and where you think you're going, where do you draw strength from in those times that are difficult?
I draw strength. I see my faith as something that I don't live in my own. For me, a communitarian faith is what I have. So I live faith. So like every Monday night, although we've now shifted it to Wednesday, every Wednesday night, I meet with about half a dozen other guys. 4 of them are, they're consecrated and they live in community and they're lay people. 2 of the other guys are married, and we just share. We do a meditation together, we reflect together, but we talk about how we're trying to live our lives and live our faith. And so I get a lot of strength from that. But also prayer. And I don't know, I've been at the prayer game quite a long time. And if someone asked me, "What's your prayer life like?" Because somebody asked me this recently. I don't use a lot of words in prayer anymore. It's kind of like the old married couple, they've been married for 50 years or something. And they sit there and they're content to be together. They don't need to say a lot. And that's, so I can at any moment just sort of just be with God,
Yeah.
But I think the Eucharist, Mass, is probably equally a massive part of my life of getting strength. Yeah.
Fantastic. So we'll go to Cameroon now, and Just talking about how you were received when you went there at first.
Yeah, I mean, it was a fantastic experience, you know. I mean, it was like completely, it's a lot different from Lanarkshire, you know. In some ways, in other ways, Coatbridge is quite like Africa, actually. But you can ask me about that later.
Well, and what were your kind of overall impressions like when you first went out there?
When I arrived, obviously, the climate was terrible where I stayed, because we got 4 meters of rain a year. I mean, it was rainier than Greenock, because it was on a kind of mountain escarpment. You know, the parish that I was in went from like 300 feet above sea level to 8,000 feet. And so a lot of my life was spent trekking up and down, you know, these mountains. But the people were fantastic. The people were really, I was just amazed at the joy of the people who, you know, by Western standards would be materially poor, but socially were wealthy because of the enormous sense of community that they had. And they were very welcoming, you know, and open, and just their way of seeing life and seeing faith was centered upon being with other people. And I think that I obviously felt. I mean, I never ever, although I'm the national director of the Pontifical Mission Societies, I never felt myself to be a missionary in the classic sense of the word. You know, that I went there ostensibly to find my vocation, and basically I received it by living with these people. So I received my vocation from the Bangwa people, from people in Cameroon. Yeah, so initially, obviously, that was my first year. But
and you know, previously on our website and Missio Scotland's website, you've shared kind of some stories and things like that from your time in Cameroon. Is there anything that really stands out? Any standout memories or stories maybe you haven't shared?
There's hundreds of stories, you know. Some of them really funny, some of them really sad, you know. I mean, the saddest one I think I ever had was a guy who he was lying in this very poor kind of, not a hut, but it was a kind of, wasn't much of a building. And he was lying, he was like a scarecrow, a really poor guy. He was dying of AIDS. And I went there, and his wife was there. I mean, traditional, she was, you know, married traditionally, but not sacramental. I remember hearing his confession, hearing her confession, giving them both sacrament of the sick, performing their wedding, and then giving them communion. That I think was a very powerful experience about God in the midst with his people, you know. I mean, I loved the culture, and I really got to know it. I think, you know, people would say, what's the biggest thing that you need to have as a missionary, you know, and I think it's respect for the culture. You know, you've got to go with humility, you know, and not. But yeah, I mean, there were several times I nearly died, you know, and one of them was hanging off a cliff, which I wrote in a blog. Another one was driving through a gun battle between government forces and opposition forces during a whole kind of civil disturbance thing, you know. then I had typhoid, blackwater fever, malaria, dysentery.
The whole
I
lot.
mean, I remember once I had been ordained 3 weeks, and I had to go out to an outstation because you had a central mission, and then there was about 50 different outstations which were scattered over a whole area about half the size of, say, the south of Scotland. And some of it you could get, I would go on a motorbike, or some parts you could drive. There was a kind of main road, but a lot of the time it was also trekking. You can just on foot. Anyway, I went after 3 weeks being ordained, full of the joys, and I was preparing these children for baptism, and they were going to be baptized the next day. So there must have been about 40 or 50 of them, Kids who would be maybe around about 8, 9 years old. And we were in this little church with a zinc roof. And then the rain started battering down. And of course, nobody could hear. But the next thing was I had to go to the loo. Because I'd obviously eaten something, while I'd been on drink. So I had the runs, So I ran out. I said, just say some prayers. And I darted off out into the bush and in the bushes and got my trousers down. And the rain is battering down. And here's me with diarrhea.
Oh, jeez.
I thought, this is what being a priest means. And the next thing is the rain went off and I heard the children shouting, Father, Father, where are you? Father. There's loads of stories, and lots of laughs, lots of joys, and lots of sad things as well, obviously.
And you were speaking there about conflict, and obviously there's still problems in that front over there. Do you keep in touch with people still there, and do you still look out for Cameroon in the news and things like that?
Yeah, I was back for a year, I think 2007, 2008. And while I was there, people had given me lots of money, from Coatbridge, where I was parish priest at the time. And I built 6 schools, primary schools, beautiful. They've all been destroyed. And all the people who lived in that area have all left. They've all been scattered. And so, yeah, I'm in touch with Bangwa people who are now refugees, and also Bangwa people who are in America, who are in Germany, France, and so on. So I still have a lot of contact with them, and yeah, it's very sad because what happened was it's basically I was in the English-speaking part, and they have been treated unfairly by the national government, which is predominantly francophone. Anyways, there was a whole crisis developed, and so rebels started then to take up arms against government forces. And that area where I stayed is very remote, very mountainous, very good for guerrilla warfare. So it's an ideal place for rebels to hide out. And so the army would come in and just shoot everybody, burn buildings. So everybody had to leave, and everything that we built, all the schools, the hospital's still standing, but everything else, it's almost like, the destruction of Jerusalem in 72 AD, everybody was scattered, and so it's, yeah, it's sad, but in the midst of all that, one of the great things about African people is their capacity to be resilient, to endure no matter what, and even to laugh in the midst of adversity, and then tomorrow night, Cameroon are playing the Gambia in the semi-finals of the African Nations Cup.
So by the time this goes out, maybe they will have won the African Cup of Nations. Who knows? You've spoke quite positively about your time in the missions. Was there any kind of negatives, or did you choose not to focus on the negatives?
Yeah, I mean, there were negatives, and there were mistakes that I made. Sometimes, like a lot of my time was spent with young people, and sometimes, like one of the big things about being a missionary, being a priest in an African setting is people respect you and people will take what you say seriously. And sometimes maybe I kind of overstepped my authority and kind of, gave people a row or bawled them out or so on. And maybe I was too hard at times, because you're building the church, and so it has to be strong. And sometimes you pound the foundations to make sure that they're going to be suitable, for. Yeah, and although it's interesting. I sometimes get communications. Like I got one the other day from young people who were young during my time there, who somehow or other find my email address or who Google me, from somewhere in North Carolina, where they now live, or something, or in Douala in Cameroon, and so they send me messages saying, "I'm glad you taught me this. I'm glad you taught me that." But there are all. I didn't do everything perfectly, and so there's that. There's regrets. Maybe I could have been kinder at times. I hope I was, but then. Yeah, negative things. I think one of the things is that you are always a foreigner.
Mm-hmm.
And even although you try to become one with the people, because that's incarnation, that's what it's all about. You have to become one with the people you're with. And yeah, I took a great interest and respect for the culture, and so and I was made a chief, kind of the rank of a duke. I still have my throne sits in the king's palace, and I have my cabinet members who sit on that throne because I'm not there, and but you are always different, and I don't know, maybe. You're different because you're a European. Often you're more educated than the people you're with, and you've seen the world more than they have. And also there's a whole colonial legacy that people are confronting when they meet someone who's white, and
yeah.
But they love you. But there is always that little that I am different, and maybe just as a priest you would always be different, But yeah, and then sometimes, I find as a priest, some of my work is repairing the damage that priests who came before me did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Some guy who lost the plot.
Yeah.
And maybe in the parishes that I'm in, 10, 15, 20 years from now, some young guy will be repairing the damage that I've done, I don't know. But yeah, there are difficulties, and yeah, but if you, I lived with usually two other guys, So we kind of supported one another and kept one another in mind, you know.
I mean, what does the term mission mean to you overall? What would you say it means?
Mission. I would say mission is often seen as a kind of activity. Whereas I would tend to see mission as a state of soul. It's where you are a presence of God with others. I don't see mission as a kind of my individual mission sort of thing, although I maybe do have an individual mission in a particular circumstance, but mission, the kind of broader thing about mission, is a shared experience of the presence of God. That we have one responsibility, which is, if we live the new commandment to love one another as Christ loved us, then we create the conditions where Christ can be present among us. And he's the missionary. He's the one who changes. He's the savior of the world, you know, not. So I would see it as a kind of a state of soul where you live it with others, and together then you kind of present a vision of what it means to be human, what reality is, what society should be, where everything is given a meaning. Giving meaning to a world in search of meaning.
So you come back from Cameroon back in Scotland. Did you feel different? Did you notice differences, or did you see quite a lot of similarities having been on, having served on two different continents?
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's a big difference. I mean, I remember once in Cameroon, kind of just suggesting at the end of Mass, I said, because you could have 1,000 people, no bother, and Mass would last for 2 hours, and then on big days like Easter time and the Feast of the Assumption, which was a big feast in Cameroon, Mass could be 4 hours long, no bother.
Mm-hmm.
And it was sung, it was danced, it was noisy, it was raucous, it was full of life, and so on. Whereas here in Scotland, I came back and Mass was very kind of quite solemn.
Mm-hmm.
And not a lot of life about it, and maybe it was much more reflective and more prayerful. But there was a kind of absence of the social, which I missed, and in terms of kind of like the liturgy, but people are people, most people are nice. And I mean, I come back and I was when I come back into I come into the diocese, and so the bishop put me in Our Lady of Lourdes in East Kilbride for a year with Father Bill Nolan, as he was at that time. I think it was to check me out, to see that I was, orthodox and sort of not off my head or anything. But yeah, I mean, it was different, obviously, and there was a longer tradition of faith here, whereas in Cameroon, where I was, often it was, you were baptizing the first generation.
Yeah.
But there were people who had suffered for the faith. Some of the older people had really suffered for the faith, and they had incredible wisdom and so on. So there was a difference kind of in the way faith was displayed and the way faith was lived. But it was also, I mean, I spoke earlier about being different, I went to Straven, and I really loved Straven because it was a small parish, and so you got to know people.
Yeah.
And what I would do is on a Saturday night, I would get a Chinese carry-out, and I would just knock on somebody's door in the parish and say, I brought my dinner. Just go in and sit, because that would be a very typical African thing to do, you know, or
Yeah.
phone up people and say, what are you having for dinner tonight, you know, and I think people were kind of quite taken aback a wee bit by that, but I think they liked that, you know. Maybe I'm interpreting that wrong, but and so that, and then I was in Coatbridge for quite a long time. And I mentioned earlier that Coatbridge is quite like Africa.
Yep.
Because Coatbridge is brilliant. I mean, you hear people say, "Oh, it's a dump," and you know, there's all kinds of problems. Coatbridge is brilliant because the people are absolutely brilliant. They have a great sense of family.
Yeah.
You know, somebody said to me, "What did Coatbridge people do? What kind of interest do they have?" I think for many Coatbridge people, at least the ones in Kirkwood, the first thing you did when you had free time was go and see your family. And so there was that great sense of that relationships were important, you know, which was kind of similar. So in that sense, it was quite similar to Africa, you know. And
yeah. I mean, that's maybe like a microcosm of what you're talking about earlier in terms of maybe losing a wee bit of the social element of things, because you look back in history and you know, people like my great grandparents and stuff like that who'd come over from Ireland. The church was a major a kind of social point for everybody to kind of gather, you know, and you know, the church tied in with the school, tied in with, you know, family life and stuff like that. It was all kind of maybe a wee bit close knit back then. Maybe we're a wee bit more distant these days than we were than our ancestors were.
I mean, I think another thing was that as a priest in Cameroon, you could have an impact upon people's lives at kind of very fundamental levels, not just spiritual. But, you know, you like, it just kind of, it's one of the things missionaries do, you know, or priests do, you know, that you build roads to remote communities, you know. And I mean, some of the old missionary guys, the Mill Hill guys, were absolutely phenomenal human beings, you know. And but you impact people's lives, not just in a kind of religious sense, but also the whole of society. And there, the boundaries between being, you know, a fully paid up member of the Catholic Church and a person who loves God, the boundaries, you know, of who wasn't baptized, you know. And I think the church there has a voice that is listened to and has an impact upon society, even at a political level as well, and usually for good, you know.
So you, having previously been a diocesan director with Missio Scotland, you become the national director. So what does the duties and responsibilities of a national director of the Pontifical Mission Society's Scottish branch, Missio Scotland, what does that entail?
Well, I was diocesan director for 2 months, and then the previous director wasn't continuing, and so I was asked to look after it. So I kind of learned the thing on the you know, and to me, the kind of central idea, I think you need to have a kind of central sort of vision of what you're about and what you're doing. You know, I sat down and thought, well, what is this about? You know, is it about raising money? Yeah, it's about raising money because people in different parts of Asia or Africa or South America, they need cash to do stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's just about the cash, then it's missing the whole point.
Sure.
It's about presenting a vision of the church as a family where, you know, we here support our brothers and sisters in every other part of the church through prayers, and if they need money, then we share what we have, because what we have has come from God. So and then they share with us their prayers and so on, or they send us priests or sisters or whatever. So it's that sense of communion. So that's the kind of, that would be the point. So everything else comes from that kind of central idea. So my responsibilities are directing the staff. God help. It's kind of like herding cats, but anyway. No, working obviously closely with staff, and that has been great. You know, Sister Stacey, I mean, she was great when I arrived. I mean, she knew everything and she knew the ropes, and I don't think I would have been able to continue or do what I do without really her. Stacey,
I think that's true of all of us, because at one point she was Missio. She was the last person standing. So
so it's part of my role obviously is working with the staff. And sometimes I have to be a figurehead, you know, which is not something that I kind of naturally gravitate towards, but that also means then that I link in with the national directors of other countries. So throughout the world, and like all the national directors of Europe, we kind of meet on Zoom and so on. And it's really to get this sense of, it's not just Scotland contributing to this kind of vision of the churches as a global family in a real sense. But it's all of these different, the church everywhere, interacting and sharing. So that's part of my kind of role. Then obviously, you know, I have to bring everything in front of the bishops. You know, the bishops really, the work I do, I mean, I was appointed by the bishops of Scotland, so I have to kind of let them know what we're doing and so on. Yeah. Lots of other things probably that I'm forgotten or I don't do them.
We've touched on a wee bit about the finances, and Missio is kind of, is it fair to say it's quite unique in terms of how it works with its finances? You know, maybe, you know, you'll get some charities that will say, if you pay such and such, it goes to such and such. Missio is a wee bit different. Can you maybe explain that to people?
Yeah, I mean, on the one hand, it's actually can be seen as a handicap, but on the other, it's actually about fairness as well. The way, so we who are here in the Western world largely, you know, we have money, but because of our faith, because we're Catholics and Christians, then that money isn't just you know, it's my money and that's it. It's part of the kingdom of God, and I have to look after it. Now, obviously, sometimes I'll spend it on stupid things for myself and so on, but I should really try to see that what I possess financially belongs to everybody, and I'm looking after this bit of it. Then you have other people in the church who their faith maybe is stronger, they pray more, their churches are fuller, so they're contributing to the life of the church. But they maybe need a church building, or they need a dispensary, or they need kids needs books or fed, or a whole host of different things. So the arrangement is that everybody, you put what you have, your possessions in common, and that includes your needs. So their needs, they put their needs in common with everybody to say, well, this is one of the riches that we have, that we actually need money. And so that need is not a negative thing. It's actually a very positive thing, because it enables us to interact with them and to give what we have. So what they do is they then apply. There are thousands of applications, unfortunately, you know, that we can't have all of them. So they would apply, and they would be sent to Rome. And so Rome then will kind of have a list of all these different projects, and it's allocated to each country. You know, it's very easy to kind of say, well, I just want the projects with the wee child, and because everybody likes giving to children.
Sure.
But you still need to build stuff. You know, like whether it's a church or whether it's a house for sisters who are going to run a dispensary, you know, or build a school or something like that. So it's a way of being fair, so that the little communities somewhere in Mbindia and kind of northwest Cameroon, they don't have money to build their church, but they've got a little bit. So what we usually say, they have to provide 14% of the total cost, and then they apply to Rome, and so Rome would then inform Scotland, for example. There's a little community in Mbindia in northwest Cameroon. They need such and such, you know, £10,000, and they're going to supply, you know, 1,400. So I would send the money to the papal nuncio in Cameroon, and it then gets sent to the diocese and given used then, and it's all accountable the whole way through how the money is used.
Is that something that you think makes Missio Scotland differ from other charities, or is there other ways in which it differs?
So I wouldn't describe us as a charity. I mean, I know we say we are the Pope's official charity, but you know the expression, there's nothing colder than charity. Charity is where I have, and generously, I give to someone who has not. Noble, worthy, good. But often in charities, there might not be a connection with the person who's giving and the person who's receiving. Maybe at the level of humanity, yes. But whereas in the church, one of the things that we must learn to do is to build bridges between a community here and a community elsewhere, you know, so in that sense, it's, yeah, okay, charity begins at home, and our home is the church. So maybe we are a charity, I don't know, but it's other charities. I think, I don't know. I mean, I can't judge what these other charities do. I mean, they all do fine work, you know, but sometimes, like, also Missio would be seen as part of the church's mission as a whole, you know, and that's done through different ways. So, you know, the two principal ways is, so you would have SCIAF, which is part of the Caritas network, which would fund, you know, projects which, you know, there's no, maybe not even any church involvement. They might actually just sponsor some group who are not religious or something like that, which is fine, to meet maybe a specific need in a community, which is good, you know. Whereas we're about the church helping the church sharing. And if people look, then, you know, I remember once a wee old lady, sorry if I've been a bit long with this.
Oh, not at all.
But there was a wee old lady from Bichati, which was a very kind of remote forest place in Cameroon. And there had been a group of American missionaries from a kind of evangelical, sort of full gospel church, they were called. And they came and they said that they were baptizing everybody and anybody. What they would do is they would baptize, and then they would go back to America, but the people were baptized. And they offered baptism to this old lady, and she said no. She had been learning doctrine with the Catholic catechist for about 2 years. And obviously she was not she was not educated at all, but so it was quite difficult for her, you know. And they said to her, why do you not want baptized? It's very easy, just go up there and they'll baptize you. She said, no. She said, they want to give it to me for nothing. But the Catholic Church asks me for something. And that's why I want baptized with them.
Yeah.
And I think there's a wisdom in that, you know, sometimes there are disasters and so on, and you have charities which meet those immediate needs. But ultimately, we're called to build a bond with people. And we're lucky in that, because we're like the church helping the church, with a Sciaf is the church helping the world, we already have a bond there that's more than just humanity.
I mean, how has Missio Scotland as an organisation evolved over the years?
I think it goes hand in hand with how the church has evolved. You know, when I was a young boy, there used to be missionaries who came from the parish that I grew up in, you know, and every now and again they would come home, and it was Father John and Father Bill and Father, you know, Wally, and who were all either white fathers or Mill Hill fathers or something. So when Mission Sunday came around on the third Sunday of October each year, you kind of knew what mission was, because even these missionaries would come into the school, the primary school, and talk to the kids and all that about, you know, fighting lions and all that kind of stuff. So there was a great sense of connectedness between the Catholic kind of population in Scotland and the mission lands through these missionaries who were their own sons and their own daughters. You know, so there was already a connection. Whereas now, the word mission might have a slightly negative connotation today, that you're going to try and capture people for the Catholic Church, you know? So in that sense, we have to put the message over much more clearly. You know, Pope Francis says, we're not into proselytization, you know, capturing people. We're there to love people, but above all, that between us as Christians, that there is that love. And that's so it's Christ among us who's the missionary. And that's what should attract people. So a lot of, in the past, Missio would have been about supporting missionaries who were Scottish, you know, or who were white, you know, to put it bluntly. Whereas now Missio is about the church here assisting the church elsewhere, and that church in Uganda or Zambia or, you know, India is also helping us, because it's a crossover. There's lots of priests now in Scotland who come from Africa and Asia and so on. So it's much more. So it's much more about this sense. Missio's task is to create a sense of church as family, as a global reality. Otherwise, you know, one of the things Pope Francis is very much against is this kind of inward-looking church, you know, and I think Missio's role is to help the church to be, in say Scotland, to be outward-looking to the other parts of the world.
And you've been at Missio Scotland for the same amount of years as I have. What do you think are some of the most recent successes?
Well, the pandemic has been quite a challenge, you know. Yeah. I think that we kept alive during the pandemic, literally, and also as an organisation, because obviously we rely on funds coming from, you know, either Mission Sunday or people leaving money to us. You know, that's people maybe in their will they would leave money to us or donate online. I think the fact that people did support us during what was a very difficult time for Missio, but for all charities. I think that's a kind of sign of success in recent times, during the pandemic. I think one of the challenges has been to kind of get our name known, because people maybe don't know what Missio is. And, it was complicated, talking about differences, in the past it was known as the Pontifical Mission Societies, and you had 4 different societies, the Propagation of the Faith, the Holy Childhood, the St. Peter the Apostle, and the Missionary Union, which people, they wouldn't get, unless you really went into the whole business to research it and understand it. But so I think we've simplified maybe our presentation of who we are, but also what we're about, Yeah, there are successes in terms, how do you measure success? True success is that people live better lives. And you can't really measure that, that the funds that people gave and donate in different ways has impacted the lives of people that we don't even know their names. And so, so it's maybe not up to us to kind of judge,
Sure. What would be your hopes for Missio Scotland in the years to come, in the years ahead? What would you like to see?
I think I would love to see more engagement with young people. Because young people have an energy, and they have an idealism that I think could fit in very well with this vision, But also it would provide a kind of focus to enable them to understand where their faith fits into everything. That I think would be my biggest hope. Where will Missio go? I think we'll continue this process of trying to become better known and getting the message better known,
Yeah.
I think we're also helped because of Pope Francis and his kind of vision, which is very in tune with the world in which we live.
Well, if you were putting on your marketing hat and you were selling Missio to young people or people in general, why would you say it's important to support the work of Missio Scotland?
Because what gives life meaning is being connected. Whether it's being connected to a place, that I live in Calderbank, and it is amazing the number of people who had the chance to leave Calderbank, which is a wee village in the outskirts of Airdrie, and they would not leave. I buried a really lovely lady the other day there, a woman called Rosemary Kennedy, lived her entire life here, had the chance to go to kind of really fabulous places like Coatbridge and, but no, she wanted to stay here with her family. So being connected to a place, I think, is very important. Because when you feel a sense of identity to the place where you come from, or the place your ancestors came from, that then helps you to understand people in other countries and in other circumstances. So that's one thing. Connectedness, I think, but to connect with people, if you have a strong sense of community, then that gives meaning to your relationships with people abroad, people far away. And it enables you then to have an idealism and a kind of bigger vision of what it means to be human, what humanity is. And I think that's part of Missio's role. And I think young people today, we have to find ways, because although Missio is about, ostensibly us helping kind of people in other parts of the church elsewhere and they help us by their prayers and sending personnel. But there's also the very act of going out and being concerned about other places, I think, has a good benefit for us as human beings. And I think Missio is a place where that can be done, but also why it's being done, because it's connected to God, it's connected to a faith and a whole tradition.
Excellent stuff. Now, we're going to finish on a light-hearted note as we put a bow in this episode. If we just spoke solely about, religion and faith, it wouldn't be a true reflection of yourself. So what I'm going to do in the course of these podcasts is ask people to tell me something about themselves that other people might not know. Now, with yourself, I would like to choose this because I'd like you to indulge me because I found it fascinating. Tell us your links to Robert the Bruce.
Right, Robert the Bruce. So my family came from Flanders in like the kind of early 11th century, 10th century. Yeah, 10th century. They settled in England, and then the Normans came, so they fled to Scotland. And one of them was a guy called Sir Simon Lockhart, Locard, and he settled. The family settled in Lanark, but also down parts of Ayrshire. Like Symington, for example. He was a guy who started that. God, this will take a long time. Sorry. Anyway, the kind of, so when Robert the Bruce was dying, he said he had always wanted to go to the Crusades in the Holy Land, and he couldn't go because as soon as he would leave, the English would be over the border and take over Scotland. So he said, when I die, cut out my heart and bury it at the gates of Jerusalem. So he died, and, Simon Lockhart, his pal, and another guy called the Black Douglas, cut out his heart, put it in a lock, and then took it attempted to take it to the Holy Land. But they got waylaid in Valencia, Spain, got into a fight with some Moors, were captured, then they were set free, and Simon, the Black Douglas, was killed. And so Simon Lockhart brought the heart back, buried it in Melrose Abbey. And the name then was changed to Lockhart. And so it's very interesting that the coat of arms of the family is a heart surrounded by a lock, a kind of medieval lock. And the motto is Corpandi Seratum, which is I open locked hearts, which is a pretty good kind of motto for a guy who's a priest. So that would be kind of my connection to Robert the Bruce. And when they buried the heart, I held the lock because it was found in 1993, taken to Edinburgh University, and they kind of put it in a new kind of container. And I held that, and it was like powerful, yeah. And I thought one of my ancestors held this thing, held this heart,
So there you go, folks. If you ever go to Corpus Christi in Calderbank, your priest is a member of the nobility, or at least descended from. Father Vincent, thank you very much for taking time out. I know you're a busy man running the parish as well as Missio, so thanks very much for speaking to us in the first We Are Mission podcast.
Thanks very much for having me.
Missio Scotland is the Scottish branch of the Pontifical Mission Societies, the Pope's official charity for overseas mission. To learn more about the work of Missio Scotland, you can visit our website www.missioscotland.com. You can like us on Facebook, www.facebook.com/Missio Scotland. You can also follow us on Twitter, Missio_Scotland, and on Instagram, Missio Scotland. If you would like to donate to Missio Scotland, visit www.missioscotland.com/donate. You can also call us on 01236 449 774 or send donations to Missio Scotland, 4 Laird Street, Coatbridge, ML5 3LJ. Please keep us in your prayers. Thank you and God bless.